we are here. The first thing we were gonna do.
Do people want the mics? We don't really have an accessibility issue for such a small group.
For the recording?
No, we have like ceiling mics, so you guys are good.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
Okay, so the first thing we were gonna do anyway is just kind of have an opening question, which we were gonna do on Post-it notes.
But I think we don't need to now.
Yeah, well, and so do you wanna just kinda, we can do introductions with everybody.
Yeah, let's do intro, and let me see if I can make this reach now, because.
Yeah, I think you can, that'll be easy. So you wanna go first?
Okay, sorry. I'm sorry for the filibuster on assignments. I'm Alara Schwartz. I have very bad spatial abilities, and that's why I went to law school. I teach in SPA and Gov. Bridget and I've been fortunate to work a little bit with some of her democracy and learning projects, and I run a dialogue project at AU that, hopefully we can find useful tools from it for you.
Bridget Trogdon, so Dean of Undergrad Education and Academic Student Services. So when you say ASAC, like that's what you're actually going to get an email, because that is synonymous with disability support. We actually have a whole lot of academic support. So the name is going to change to be the Eagle Learning Center. So you'll find out something about that. But I'm here with like my professor and scholar hat on. My faculty appointment's in the School of Education because it's a kind of scholarship that I do. My doctorate's in chemistry. This is year 21 for me as a professor. I feel like I've taught everything. But one of them is just, what is the role of American higher education and democracy, coming in with things like assignments, et cetera. So this is just the three of you. I don't know if you all know each other, but Erhard, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Ben Garter, I'm from the economics department, and even though typically the classes will have very limited options to implement what I learned today, I'm also teaching a class which is called Econ 110 for Global Majority, which is an ethical reasoning class. And so that is about half ethical reasoning and half development economics, covering poverty, inequality, access to water, and all these other issues that developing countries face. And there I think I may be able to implement some of what I learned today.
I'm Allie Chrysler, she, her pronouns. I'm in the Department of Health Studies. I think I'm entering my 7th year. I started adjunct, and then now I direct our undergrad program in public health. And I mean, courses anywhere from, research methods, health comm, to capstone internships. I feel like I've taught most of our courses.
Hi, I'm Gabriella Meltzer. I'm a new faculty member jointly appointed in environmental science and health studies. And this summer I'm designing and will be teaching a new environmental health course in the fall.
Important stuff. Are you working with the new PhD program as well?
I have offered myself as a resource to them, and I think that Vicki Fanon is very excited about it.
Awesome. This was just kind of the flow that we had, because we want to make sure that you're meeting the goals. We try to do truth in advertising of what we said this session would be about. So just kind of big picture, our courses as laboratory and democracy. We'll talk a little bit about those pieces. This is part of higher admission in our disciplines, even if we're not political scientists, right? Because you're in government, but nobody else is, how those infused democracy course planning, so we'll talk through some of those, being explicit, disagreement, facilitating the collaboration. And democracy education isn't just bringing politics into everything. There are issues like, you're talking about some of the issues that will be in your class. And then civic learning is career learning as well. So we'll touch on that.
And I think it'll be a really good segue into what we don't need to do with Post-its now, but we can, but I think we should still do, because I'm hopeful that by the end of this, you'll have as well a different viewpoint maybe on some of the big econ classes, the way that democracy is happening and we're just not naming it. On the Post-its, one of the reasons that I do the Post-its, we don't need it for this small group, but just a thought in that component of the democratic learning that is, and I think this connects to the pre-discussion about the ungrading and the devices, et cetera. I use Post-its the first day of every class because it's a great way to get people speaking right away. and it's sort of like the chat was on Zoom. And I do 2 Post-its as what do I want from myself, like what do I want to learn in this class, and what's going to be hard, like what am I asking of myself, which is self and community. But I'm just putting that out there, like a democratic skill that I would say is getting into the mix and getting into the polity and doing the thing. So it's just a reason that I use Post-its. I think it's a universal design thing for varying communication modes, etc. So big question. Why do we gather in classes? Why is AU not just like a correspondence course or, a fully asynchronous online thing? Like what's the purpose of gathering in classes?
I think innovation happens in classes where students
I
are
can
sharing,
describe if you want.
with one another and building upon each other's ideas. I think that's a big part of this classroom.
So innovate, build off each other, share ideas.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, probably the attention span and the attention students give is higher in smaller classes and in classes than it would be online.
Yeah. Classes might be better designed for human thinkers.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts? Like why
Classes.
Create a sense of community and connection.
community and connection? Bridget, you want to play?
I did teach a fully online asynchronous course for grad students a couple times, and they interact with me, and we do go back and forth. They don't interact with each other. Although I mean there were some tools, and I don't want to get super deep in the weeds, but like they would do collaborative reading through perusal. Like they would read PDFs, and they would be in reading groups, and they would also they would leave comments as they were reading, and they would respond to each other there. So I mean they did interact with each other a little bit, but not a whole lot.
And it's interesting too, because I feel like that answer and part of your answer kind of show the difference between having an online and an in-person class, but it's actually kind of also the difference between an individual tutorial and a group class, whether online or not. Because if you were teaching in 2020, 2021, we came up with all kinds of ways to have people gather,
Yeah.
right? And if you do any online seminars, but the difference between being together, and apart, we've got community. My favorite to add is we test each other's ideas and perspectives.
Yeah.
We are more than, and one of the next book I'm working on is basically like, how do you design a class that couldn't have been an email? Like what do we give to each other that we can't do alone? And some of that can be innovation. I think innovation is a variation on my viewpoint about classes. We thought we'd have a big room full of giggles. This was on me. Bridget is mature. So if democracy,
You just like this movie.
you did not remove it. So if democracy was a class, what would the learning objectives and learning outcomes be?
I think to understand the branches of government and the political process, to understand, I think it's important that I think when we first walked in, we were talking about how students are only understand, there's this misconception that it was actually in a session I was in this morning, where we were talking about how students have a misconception that their only way for their voice to be heard, especially this generation, is through protest.
Mm-hmm.
But
Is that a misconception? Okay, but they do, they think,
yeah, and in fact, there's a much more intricate policy and legislative process that I think it's important for all of us to be aware of and to understand. Because if you want to change things, you have to understand the whole system and how it works.
Yeah, understand the system. I teach student activism workshops, and I say you have to understand the system with a level of detail that a jewel thief in a heist movie understands the casino. You need to know when the provost's secretary goes to the bathroom. You need to know all the things about the institution.
I also think part of it is how do you read a room?
None.
is part of democracy skills.
Yes.
You know, it's that social emotional component that we're losing out in our K-12 system that I think is a big part of that skill set.
You know what, I'm Bridget, this is Lara.
Hi, sorry, I'm Hala. I'm sorry to be late.
No
I
worries.
was in the School of International Service, so.
We just love whoever wants to come in and have the conversation, so we're good.
So we're talking about like if democracy was a class, what would those learning objectives and outcomes be?
I don't know. I don't feel qualified to answer that question at this point. Maybe after the call.
Can I have another comment? And it's also like overlapping with why we gathered. But like understanding and embracing diverse voices and perspectives.
Yeah.
Just giving you an
I
audio
had
stick.
a problem when years ago I was first teaching first year seminar courses, which are maybe more akin to complex problems here than anything else, but it was kind of like a mixture between complex problems and writing studies. And you know, it would be the students come to class, or it was actually more when they would skip class. I'm like, the issue with you missing class is we are creating knowledge together, you know, because we engaged in this material outside of class, and then we're, you know, I'd call it sometimes, you know, like their notes in class, or it was jiggle, right? Push on this idea and see how it jiggles. And you can't do that if you're not there in community. And, you know, and so I think the part of the democracy skills, wow, this green marker was really terrible. Talk about non-accessible, I'm sorry. Yeah, we had a marker fail.
I'm gonna
It's okay.
take a picture of
We'll
this
make it
later
work.
and we'll make,
Yeah.
I can boost the color.
But the issue sometimes would be, you know, that like you have to teach them how to engage in this discussion. There's a great book, They Say, I Say. It's a little old, but it explains the moves of academic writing, is actually like its subtitle. And this idea that you don't just say smart things in a vacuum, you know, like we're interacting with each other's ideas, because otherwise it would just be, look at me, respond to me, and that's basically what we were talking about. That's the same as an asynchronous online course. No, you need to interact with each other.
So one way to think about, because I think your discipline actually has a lot of democratic skills, one way to think about like what are the democratic learning outcomes, like what are the things that are bad for democracy? When people aren't good at evaluating claims, when you don't have a good sense of how to look at a text claim piece of data representation and say like, is this supported? Right, these things are bad for democracy. They, you know, if people are going out and saying like, I'm gonna go to the polls based on my concern about the microchip and the vaccine, people choose things that won't help the community, right? So the things that we just call good teaching, right, or the things that we just call research methods or information literacy or capacity to do whatever it is we do, I put those in those democratic skills. So sometimes a way to think about, you know, you mentioned innovation, where are the democracy skills? You know, if I'm looking at my democracy and saying, what, like, why is it not healthy? What's not there? Capacity to understand diverse perspectives, but also all of the things that we do in higher ed that we don't call democracy. But right, like in a what was the reason? This will go great for. So I just wrote down a couple of these, and they were the ones that you all said, plus my kind of information literacy and which I largely put into that big, and that gets us to like, you know, funnily enough, the people who came up with higher ed had some ideas about how these things
And I think what this is, you know, I mean, I said this earlier, my doctorate's in chemistry, right? It's like, oh, well, why is a chemist talking about democracy? And I think it's because I've also done a lot of work in undergraduate general education in the US, which is very much an American distinctive. Like there, you know, it's not everything is binary, but you can kind of collapse it down into the Prussian model and the US model. So the Prussian model of education, which most European institutions still follow, is very technically oriented, very, you know, like the undergraduate degrees are 3 years instead, and those kinds of things. And in the US, it's very different. Can you just, So, just the first two, one more click, there we go. So those two, just in the history of American higher education, and, I think it's important to talk about this because it gives you something to think about and also to push back against if anybody ever says, oh, this isn't part of your job. I think at AU, like, our president, our provost, where we are, why we were founded, our institution is literally called American University. This isn't as much of an issue, but, American higher ed, just the history was, seminars of sedition, and this was when we only had a few private institutions, the old ones that were founded in the 1600s and early 1700s. Jeffersonian era was all about building a new nation, and I lean on this a lot. The state legislators started chartering universities to prepare leaders for the nation, and like University of Virginia is a great place to look at. I went to a tiny college in Kentucky, Transylvania. It was chartered by Thomas Jefferson in 1780 as part of that because it was educating leaders for the West, which at that time was Central Kentucky, or what is now Central Kentucky. The mid-19th century, the land grant institutions, this was after World War II, when we had a lot of science and progress, and the other institutions, and I lived in the South for a long time, so I think this is actually a really interesting perspective, like the University of Virginia, University of North Carolina, University of South Carolina, University of Georgia, University of Florida, University of Tennessee, actually, they're not because they're further west, but all of those that was where the rich planters' sons went to school. And so, the mid-19th century with the land grants, this was, coming out of, I went back, mid-19th century, wrong place. So this was Civil War, right? And so after the Civil War, we started having the land grant institutions because mechanization was the way to recover. So that's why instead of UVA, you have Virginia Tech. Again, in South Carolina, instead of University of South Carolina, you had Clemson, where I worked for a long time. NC State, Florida State, right? All these different land grant institutions that were democratizing education for the middle classes. John Dewey, we get into democracy and education, voting rights and development of public opinions. And I really like, 2022, this whole task force that at that point came out of the U.S. Department of Education, and I quote a piece of it because I think it's really important, especially in undergrad education, pushes back against a prevailing national dialogue that limits the mission of higher ed to workforce preparation and training while marginalizing disciplines basic to democracy. That's important, right? Because we get asked all the time, what's the value? What's the value of higher ed? It seems like it's curriculum or career. The curriculum's not preparing people for careers. That's not true. Like, there are ways we can be more explicit. And then just as an institution, as we're moving into a new strategic plan, we need to be able to prepare our students for their first jobs, but also their last jobs. And as a colleague, Wim Taylor, who does work in UEAS, but does a lot of student-facing programs, he said we need to teach our students how to see around corners, which is true because, the jobs of the future haven't been invented yet. AI, and that shook us up. None of us in higher ed were ready. And it just, January 2023, right, 2022, I can't even remember the year. I was like, whoa, what is this? And just overnight, it changed things and we weren't ready. So how can we do both of these?
Although I feel like the English majors were ready, because if you do, I was an English major. If you're like, okay, there are texts, there's thinking about texts, at its core, like what is it that we can do? I think if you've spent long enough justifying your education, you internalize like what's worthwhile about doing education. You don't have to spend time justifying your education if you took computer science, except now you do. So. Want to make things useful for you, and regardless of what you have to do this fall, want you to come out of this, and we're going to talk about kind of a call to action with at least one thing you can do that meets with your goal of doing some kind of democracy across the curriculum. And so the easiest one, and probably the most effective, and the thing that I recommend for everybody, and this is true for intellectual diversity, this is true for democracy, this is true for every part of teaching, is just make it explicit. So a bunch of the democracy skills and the why we have a school skills are the same thing, right? We could have used the other GIF from The Office. It's the same picture. Like having a university and having a democracy, it's the same picture. Our students don't tend to know that, and sometimes we might not either. we might not think like, wow, chemists have a way of evaluating claims that's really useful for people evaluating claims in the public square. And internalizing that and being proficient in that has made me somebody who's able to show up in hard conversations, right? So the biggest thing you can do, you don't have to redesign your course, classes start in 2 weeks, is be explicit. And what I've done here is, everybody used Bloom's taxonomy before or seen it? There is an enormous connection between the democratic skills, and particularly the ones that are like kind of literacy and, you know, information literacy and kind of what we call critical thinking, and all the students sagely nod, but nobody defines it. And kind of just the what are the levels of engagement at a college level. So however you decide to do it, you can decide to do it with reference to a matrix like this. You can decide to do it with reference to a discussion of how do economists, how do public health, how do environmental scientists, you know, how do people in my field evaluate claims, how do they apply ideas, how do they change their mind, how do they evolve? Make it clear and say, like, this is what we're doing here. And it's a great question to ask yourself, like, just look at your syllabus and be like, which parts of this draw upon those democracy skills or work on them or require them, and just build it into a conversation. So
Okay, so I got a game and we're good on time, so we've got about 15 minutes. And Mike, you know, we can put you in groups, but you do need a device. And if you don't have a device, we can do it on the screen. You can use a phone, a tablet, a phone, a tablet, and whatever. So we didn't make this electronic, but there are 3 because in the description we promised you some ready to use tools. So there are so many out there. So just kind of summarized 3. One is a repository that Lara will be contributing to this year. I'm the PI on, and it's there are 96-ish things in the repository right now. The items from the second cohort will be published. They should have been published in July. I'm a little miffed by that, but they will be up soon, and then more will be coming this year. So this is faculty across humanities. I say social science, but there are things that connect with all of your disciplines, that you can look for and you can use. These are open source. Take it, adapt it. You just can't sell it. So they've all got a Creative Commons license associated. The second is your major on the ballot. I've forgotten about this, so I'll put this together. I was actually an AU student, Emma Godell, who started this. And so how is it that there are public issues that you can then pull into class that are, contribute to democracy? And there's a whole list of materials that you can take, things that you can use, like ready to deploy. And then the third is a nonprofit called Project Pericles. And their repository actually looks a bit like the Teacher Scholars repository, but they have so many different things and you can drop down. We'd like to give you a little time to play around with those in some groups. So based on what I was talking about, do you all have a preferred one you would like to do at this table? Or anybody have a preferred one?
no idea.
Okay. Still kind of cruising. Okay. Well, why don't you? How about you pick your favorite one? I'm gonna walk around and look over your shoulders, and Lara will too. We'll talk about it a little bit. We've got a little time just to help point you toward things that might be useful for you. And the reason for these materials is faculty are busy, right? I'm teaching a class this term. It starts on August 26th. By August 26th, I need to know what I'm doing the first day. Let's be honest, I'm probably gonna be working on it on the 25th. And so sometimes it's like, oh crap, I need this thing. I don't have time to create it. And these are repositories where we can go and take in-class activities and assignments. Not everything has to be a whole syllabus.
So cool, this repository. But I'm a little bit confused, how do you actually download the activity itself? So I'm looking at this in-class activity, who regulates this?
Yep, scroll down. It might be because you're on
On my phone.
yeah, turn it sideways, or at the top it says do the web version. You see the little pop-up? I noticed that. It's a
Yeah,
black
switch to
box.
desktop view.
Yeah, and then you
Okay.
guys see that. Oh, download.
Yeah, this is so cool.
Yeah, and you can copy and paste. I actually used one of these, so I was teaching in AU Encounters James Baldwin class last spring. And it was kind of a weird way we were teaching it, so I was really only facilitating 4 times. But the students were talking about voting rights law, and I knew that Bernadette Ludwig had created, like already had said, oh, these are current voting rights laws from 2023 and lawsuits and things like that I was able to pull into the class and I didn't have to redo. So, yeah, pick any one you want. And there's a few people have left out, so it's also.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
what is your discipline? So I'm not teaching faculty, but I wanted to take advantage of because I think I'm here. So I'm the strategic partnerships, research assistant professor over there. Because we do so much that's involved in misinformation, civic engagement, yes, wanting to see all the universities.
Sorry. Yeah, we got a little time to let you play.
Just that one.
So, if you. Sorry, I didn't realize this was not as easy. So, there's a. There's a search bar. It looks different on the web. That's fine. But, and right here,
Okay, yeah.
type in misinformation. Because there's actually a keyword in this. Cool. Then we've got at least one, so you can click on this one here. That- It's a Bernadette. So it's a partial final exam. And it shows you what.
So I think this could be really useful for us, like as we're building trainings.
You said how?
So was read off this hour. So yeah, so we work with you all.
Yeah.
I wasn't, no, it's my first time.
Here, I could do it here.
Oh, I thought you meant
We're
here.
also fixing their is take one side, that's the. So my role is strategic partner. So part of what I'm here to do is figure out like.
Sorry.
Where I'm sorry. Partner. People have to have this. I will just. And there are a variety of reasons why that would be it. Very. So just trying to figure out like, are we missing opportunities? Bridget.
You don't even. So I can keep that in.
If you have, I can just send you.
I mean, currently the situation is the economic policies of Trump are so stupid that it's very difficult. It's so difficult to come to any positive effect.
It teaches itself. But I think that can be a really great conversation because one of the challenges that I think I've had, and I've been in so many conversations about this, the kind of so-called like intellectual diversity model or like bipartisan approaches to education is that, you know, education, like the set of standards that we're using isn't the same as the political system. Like the political system is like find a median thing between two things. And bipartisanship means if there are two parties, you have to involve both of them. And education, you know, and our disciplines say like, okay, we have these modes of inquiry. And they produce answers that, and like we gotta kind of keep on trucking without regard to whether somebody decides like the answer is objectionable to them. So the answer that George Washington did bad things is objectionable to them, or, you know, masks work is objectionable to them. We just keep trucking. We're not here to broker deals. And because I teach, you know, constitutional law, it feels important. Having that conversation that's like, look, we're doing something completely different than what political parties do. We're gonna use these methods and they're gonna get us to a place. And I think the good news is, you know, Trump's policies are not good. But Democrats actually don't do things very well often either. Like nobody running the show in US politics is doing a good job. And so you can be like, look, when we do the thing that we do, you know, we don't come to the answer that Donald Trump comes to. We don't come to the answer that, you know, Chuck Schumer comes to. You know, we come to the answer that economics comes to, and there's lots of fights within that.
Yeah.
But here's how they're different from the fights that partisans have. And, you know, honestly, that is new information to a lot of our students. They just like literally, you know, they want to hear like what's, you know, well, I'm a conservative, and it's like, no, you're a Trump adherent. Like conservative means something different in economics than it means in American partisan politics. Like,
Yeah.
you know, tariffs aren't conservative. So I think it's a great democracy exercise simply to explain how the endeavor that we're doing, it's not on a continuum of the political continuum, it's its own thing, and then we can ask interesting questions like, what would the political sphere look like if everybody knew how to do economics and they started from there instead of starting for like, what does my team do?
Racial justice.
No, I mean, there's a theoretical, you know, the divergence of society, people losing their job, you know, anti-globalization. You know, there's many things which actually the Democrats or liberals, Bernie Sanders, you know, stressed. But then, you know, to have a tariff, well, does that really help? And also, yeah, it can be put into perspective, and, you know, to what degree, you know, there was a need to make corrections, but is a tariff the right one? Yeah, I can look. I know.
And this is a great info literacy thing for people too, because sometimes step one of like, I'm evaluating a policy, and I ask the question, well, is the problem the policy addresses real? And people often stop there. So like, is there crime in the District of Columbia? Yes. Oh, I guess you can send in National Guard troops. Hang on a second, like, you know, and I think again, just anything that we do that enables students to think about how our discipline solves problems, analyzes problems, engages with problems differently than political actors do, is an exercise in democracy, because it shows them how to have, you know, problem solving skills, how to like bring something into that public square other than allegiance.
That's
She's
a great
laughing at
phrase.
me.
No, that is a great phrase.
That's what we're doing.
Lara says the things that I'm thinking in better ways that I can say them. I love that.
Oh, that is
well,
the
and,
nicest, I want
you
that
know,
on a t-shirt. I want that on a like plaque on
You
my
know,
wall.
life
so
is
that I
hard.
can
We
feel
need to
good.
spread joy to each other.
Do.
So jigsaw game, I think you've got these resources, you can continue to look at them later, but just, I just made a list. I might talk to the department chairs at some point too, and see if I can get on a meeting, just that these are available to share with others, because sometimes we do get in a rut and we teach things the same way because we don't always have time to design. So these are some different resources. So just 3 questions for you all as you were going through. What did you find? How might you use these? And how might they help you meet, develop, expand, et cetera, civic and democratic learning and course? Thoughts? You probably need more time to play, but. Can you repeat the question? Well, they're right up here. So, what did you find? How might you use these? How might they help you meet, develop, expand, et cetera? Democratic civic learning in your course.
Yeah, I think like in econ, you know, especially in principal classes, we focus too much maybe on this is important and this is a theory, but maybe a linkage to why this is relevant and how it is relevant, not only for theory, but actually in life. That I think can be, I try to do that to some degree, but I think I can do more.
There's some really good research on student motivation, and I think Lara mentioned motivation earlier, or maybe that was in a different session. Anyway, I'm just gonna say Lara said it, but they do like to be able to have relevance. You know, how does this course connect to the things that I want to learn about? And so we do need to connect those in, so that can be really good.
Another tool that might, if you want to do like the how does the theory, you know, how can I make it relevant? I'll send afterward to people who registered for this session, the collaborative discussion toolkit that the Interactivity Foundation made has a bunch of, it's basically just, it's a bunch of tools for like if you wanna have a class discussion or like a group discussion in your civic group, whatever. They're a bunch of, and they're keyed by skills. So like if you wanna do one that's like generating, making, connecting to today or connecting something to your life, like there are modules and I've written some, like I know others who've contributed, and they're really that you can pick something where you go, okay, there's some theory that I'm gonna give people a chance to connect to a real world problem, and you can do that.
You get lots of these to play around with, so.
So these tools are great, and we'll send along some other tools, and actually my little project on campus has some tools too, including peer facilitators, sessions that, we have a bunch of tools we can give to you. But here are some democratic skills and so I'm gonna run through some things that we can do and that we have. So in that groundwork laying, when we're talking about our goals for the course, being accountable to others and showing gratitude for feedback, which can start with us. So if I mispronounce someone's name and they say, actually my name is pronounced Bridget, I say, thank you, right? So just showing and having a conversation, how are we going to respond to feedback from each other? Approaching discussions as a learner, not a combatant. This again, to me, is one of the primary democratic skills, getting students the information that, out in the world, it's imperative and existential that your political team win. The goal of classes is not consensus. The goal of classes is understanding. So you can just take all of your energy, burn all of your calories trying to understand, and not win. Listening and reading generously, meaning like we're both gonna assume good faith in each other, and then like I've been assigned some really challenging texts, right? I'm reading James Baldwin and he uses words that we don't use out loud, and so listening generously, including to each other, making enough effort to understand and be understood. We'll share these slides out, but these are really key to they're key to Bloom's taxonomy, and they're also key to all of those democratic skills. If you look at, Bridget gave a history of where we're going with education, and part of the 21st century part of it that's exciting is a bunch of states have adopted like career and civic readiness learning objectives for their education systems that look a lot like just gathering in a class well. And so like I think about what we try and do, the kind of good teaching that Bridget and I have talked about for a long time, or like that I do in PCD, and it's now Kentucky's higher ed standards, basically, that are like, you should be able to think critically, you should be able to cooperate, you should be able to evaluate claims, you should be able to resolve disputes, you should be able to create new proposals and solutions. They look a lot like what you came up with for why to do this and what democracy would look like.
Can you go back for a second, because I had forgotten, I wanted to chime in on one of those, because the disciplines and so the grant we have from the Mellon Foundation, because it's Mellon, it's humanities and humanities adjacent, I kind of think of it, but every year we get faculty from STEM that apply. And we really need to be able to do a version of this for people who are teaching Calc 1, right? I'm teaching Calc 1, I've got a class of 120 students, 3 times a week. Where's the democracy in that? Gen Chem 1, right? Those are some really big gateway courses, and the faculty are hungry, but they don't always know how. But I think it's not just the content, it's also how you deliver the classes and set up the learning environment. And this third one, the collaborating with peers to explore a problem, really interesting. I never travel, and my family went on vacation this year. When we were in Stockholm, we went to the Nobel Prize Museum, and so Bridget is like geeking out at this Nobel Prize Museum because it's all these people whose work I've read and whose things I've taught in class, and it's so clear that we never advance in scientific thought without people collaborating with each other, disagreeing. Darwin did not come up with his theories in a vacuum. He wrote to other people. People would read what he had published in the Royal Society and they would write back to him, and it shaped his thoughts. You know, that's democracy in action. So, and these kinds of things matter.
And wonderfully, the project that I'm gonna be doing hopefully will answer that, with Bridget's project, will answer that question of how do I make my calc class be a democracy across the
Well,
class.
I have always said this, like, you know, I'm an advocate for table name tense with pronouns.
We should have brought them. I'm sorry. It just
So, that's sorry, that was not a.
no, but we always do. But because you're right.
So I'm a strong advocate for that, and a lot of times I get pushed back and say, well, I mean, I'm like a STEM course, you know, like I don't really need to know that. I said, students want you to know their name.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I don't need pronouns because I was like, you're never going to use pronouns in your classroom. That's wild to me, right? And it like goes back to creating that community. When I went up to a student after class, not in front, and I said, can you say your name out loud to me one more time? I want to make sure I get it right. She goes, I've never had a faculty member do that.
So I think it's great that you do that. I have a variation on that.
Mhm.
What I do is I download my course roster. I take out all of like the ID numbers and all that, but I download the course rosters, the names. And it's okay because it's visible on Canvas, so I don't feel like I'm outing people as like being named Greta when they go by Max, because it's on Canvas too, like the students can already see that. And I make it a Google Doc and I say like, you have till the end of the first week or until after you've enrolled, if you add after add drop, to put on in the next column, this blank column, what do you want to have on your table card? So like if your name is Benjamin and you want to be Ben, or your name is Benjamin and if you call me Ben, I'm gonna cut you, so it's gonna be Benjamin, you know, it's there. And that way you can say Bridget, she, her, or you can just say Bridget, like it's yours. I did have some student be like, you know, Zohar Wizard of whatever as a joke, and I'm like, do you want to keep that? Because I will use it. I also tell them they can bedazzle it as they want, and then because I teach Socratically, I tell them they can write something like "Not Today, Satan" on the back if they want, because my opt out of the Socratic hellscape is to turn your table 10 around that day. No questions asked.
Can you explain that really fast? That just means you don't want to.
Yeah, so like I call on people, I cold call people. And what I say is like, if you don't want to be cold called, just, and if people want to write "Not Today, Satan" or "Don't Ask" or
Interesting.
please God no, or whatever, like they can do that. Sometimes people do, sometimes they don't. But just giving, you know, the things that our students can have a choice about, I like to give them a choice about. So the pronouns, no pronouns, like there's an argument like, no, I want everybody do your pronouns to be the norm in my class for reasons of solidarity or something. Okay, that's a choice. But I think in this one, the like opt into whatever you want expressed on your table card. And you know, knowing, you know, there are people who enjoy being at the place in their transition that they feel like they don't need to state their pronouns because it's clear it's a wide world. So just a thought on that. But I totally agree.
Yeah,
with
I'm a queer researcher, so I feel very strongly about putting pronouns because it is a position. And I'm yet to have a student say that made me feel uncomfortable.
Oh, I
You
know.
know, yeah, so I do feel like, I feel pretty strongly about pronouns because I think it sets a baseline in my classroom that's important and I want to get it right.
But you're explicit about that,
As long
and
as
you
you're
tell them
explicit.
why,
Yeah.
right?
And
That's a learning opportunity. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Coming from LGBT rights lawyer before coming here, like different age groups, different norms, and different people, different norms. But the thing is, it's making it explicit because right, like if your learning objective is everybody has to go by like, you know, Ms. Schwartz or Dr. Drogden because I want you to feel what it'll be like to be called on in law school, and you're like, this is why we're doing it, right?
Right.
Like it's just, and I think it's important because like we come to this question differently, but I think the key common ground value is like we have a reason behind it that's like connected to our objectives for the classroom, as opposed to just kind of like, this is what people do. you know, or like I don't need people's names. So some thoughts about how things work across the curriculum. So some tools, we'll give you these slides, you know, offer some readings that illustrate how people disagree. So if you're teaching a theory one day, like, you know, offering readings that that critique the theory, talking about.
Can we go back? No,
sorry.
you're fine, go back. I had a thought there. No, you were fine on the slide.
Oh, this.
I just, that bullet, I meant to bring it and I forgot, but I've used a custom textbook in class before. Like I taught a 400 level class on the chemistry of human disease. That was all like, you know, connecting in, that would be a fun thing to teach together some point.
Yeah,
But I had an extra copy of a textbook I didn't use. This was years ago. I gave it to Lara because she liked it. But there was actually a McGraw-Hill has a series called Taking Sides, and a lot of this is open source. You can just take it, and we also have examples in the library. And so you could take things like, is addiction a brain disease, right? That's a huge issue. And like in my chemistry class, we were talking about your aldehyde dehydrogenase and alcohol dehydrogenase that you use to metabolize ethanol into acetic acid. And if you have slow enzymes or fast enzymes, you're more likely to have pleasurable aspects of alcohol or to have headaches of alcohol. My household's a great thing. I like it. My spouse does not. I think his genes are different from my genes, right? And alcoholism tends to run in a lot of families. There are also societal issues, et cetera. But this was a chemistry of disease class. So as we were, better understanding enzyme kinetics, we were also reading things where there was, because it came from a Taking Sides series, one that said, no, this is an issue of willpower and, weak will, right? Which a lot of times we look at in society of, is it people's fault that they have a genetic, or if they make a choice, or is there a genetic predisposition? And that brings in really interesting things into class. But, that's one thing that it makes me think about with things that people in your discipline disagree about. It's not flat earthers versus not, like there are a number of other connections that come in that cut across all of our disciplines.
And it's the how, right? Because how do historians look at a problem, and how economists look at a problem, and how lawyers look at a problem, and how psychologists look at a problem, and how chemists look at a problem? I'll be doing a depolarization workshop later. But even if you have won, you get a gold star for democracy if your students come out of your class understanding that the way that there's a method of evaluating claims and a method of disagreeing that's extrinsic to partisan binaries or the borderline meaningless designations of liberal, conservative, etc. So if people just come out saying like, I'm not repping for, my party or what I think my affective polarization group is, but I'm repping for economists, right? Economists ask these certain kinds of questions. And that's why the collaborative problem-solving opportunities can be so helpful, because you can take something and say, here's a problem. What are the tools we've learned to date that economists would use to address these problems? So I have two ideas. It's like, how do people in each, this is what I'm writing for Bridget's Mellon program, disagree like a and listen like a. If you listen to this problem like an economist, what would an economist ask? What would an economist notice, right? And I have examples of really interesting ones that work particularly well across the disciplines. Like there's a monument on campus. Like, what does a historian want to know about the monument? What does a lawyer want to know about the monument? What does a psychologist want to know about the monument? Assign students to explore and represent different perspectives. And a way that I often do this is I don't go yes, no, but if there's a monument on campus, or people are deciding whether to arm AOPD, or people are deciding whether to have everybody have free metro fares, but it's not really free because they just pay for it in their tuition, right? The first thing I ask people to do is generate a list of the interested parties who might have thoughts about this. So like students on financial aid, students not on financial aid, parents, the people who are paying, who are looking at the insurance premiums for AU and deciding like, oh gosh, are we incentivizing people to like go, get on a bus somewhere and be a higher risk person? Like all of the people that might have skin in the game, and then go, great, you've come up with this group of people. You over here are gonna be our insurance buyer for the school or the general counsel. You over here are gonna be the parents. You're gonna be, the community around, like Washington DC, and just say, okay, what are the good faith concerns that people in all of these groups would have?
There's a whole movement about this that could be really, I'm just kind of thinking through your disciplines, like I could imagine, like even, in peril, like with reproductive justice, there's a group that's reacting to the past, so RTTP, and you can look up their website. And there are people who've come up with these, because you don't just have to look at modern problems, you can look at historic problems. So like as we're looking at the advent of birth control pills, of course we know the societal impact. I've started watching Call the Midwife, and it's really interesting seeing this, but it's also, they have the nuts, and then abortion access, and and this is of course fictionalized, but how is it that, this group of midwives who are also part of a religious order are having to figure out whether or not they should embrace abortion access, because they also see the implications in other ways. This can be a great place to assign students different perspectives to take that then help them get into those democratic aspects.
Absolutely. And another great one I just learned from a SPA colleague is he's got a class exercise he's doing that's comparing, that's like what would you do about COVID? Like, how would you evaluate what we actually did do? What could you do differently? How does what we learned from what happened affect, like, how would you even start to decide what to do about COVID? And I think it's a great example of one, because it's one that's got like an enormous amount of like affective polarization associated with it, that like, but all of our disciplines have something, especially yours, and yours, all of them actually,
All of them.
So
But it makes me think about too what we said, the connection to careers. This is something physicians do. They have M&M seminars,
Yeah.
mortality and morbidity. Every quarter, sit down, and not to be crass, but who died on the table, why, what could we have done better, right? It's a part of professionalism, professional development, communication, humility, the kinds of aspects that are also career aspects.
And one of the great things we can take from that model as well, that we can bring into our classes by way of bringing in community, you listed like be in community, but a lot of students report, and we as faculty report, there's a danger to us. Like you say a thing in front of other people and there's a danger. For us, that could be you're ratted out for wrong think to the admin, choose the admin that you are most nervous about. And for students, it could be unpopularity with each other. One of the things about the way that medical profession does it is like, this is a place of no liability, right? We have to be able to have this conversation together without threat. We have to be able to be forthright, and so we've made this agreement together, we can do this. And so democratically, in the interest of wanting to achieve all of those things that we put up onto the not incredibly accessible, democratically setting that norm of like, we're here to get this done, what will it take? One of the things that it will take is saying, we're giving each other a bit of safety as we're positing ideas, as we're playing with theories, as we're learning the discipline, our being wrong in all of the manifold ways that people are wrong, it can't come at a massive professional and social cost. Like, we're all gonna do our best and we're gonna be open to feedback. You didn't do economics well today, or you said something, insensitive. But laying that groundwork, like, our goal is these things. Our goal is to come out better able to do the things that make us ready for a career, ready to be a part of a democracy, ready to solve problems in the public interest, ready to be literate. And one of the things that we have to commit to is being invested in each other's success, which means like, Lara says something dumb, it's not going on X, it's not going into the group chat. And so we will put, we'll send back to everybody some of the things. One of the things I just do wanna let you know is that if you'd like to make your course kind of more, check a lot of the boxes, this is a list of some of the things that, if a course is gonna count, toward the dialogue certificate that we're introducing this year, these are the kinds of, sort of democracy and dialogue based assignments that people can add as a supplement to, and I'll put this, if you're thinking about adding an assignment of some kind that ups the democracy, like this is a list of things that I offer people.
It's PCD?
Sorry, project on civic dialogue, and we didn't put.
That's her big
okay.
project.
If you want some of the materials that we have, including peer leaders, it's dialogueproject@american.edu. We have time for call to action, stuff like that, and we also, as we were getting ready, we were kind of conscious that some people might have questions of like where you draw the line, like in other words, how do I know how much is too much like bringing the real world into my class or too much politics in my class. So I'm putting that out there as a question that we anticipated people might have. But I think what we could do is just get the questions.
And based on what you all teach and do, you get in the hot button stuff all the time. You can't not, so, yeah, and we just put in, call to action if you're thinking about it, if there's one thing you could change, drop, add, adopt, whatever, in a course that you're teaching to have it connect more with any of these ideals, think about it. But yeah, happy to talk about anything. I actually added something. Can I draw for just a second?
Yeah.
I think you saw it on your phone, just as Gabriella was talking earlier about like protest. Can we just refresh? Because I don't know how to get your trackpad.
Oh, refresh.
There we go. All right. I added something. This is just an infographic I've worked on over the years, quite honestly, and Lara may totally disagree with me, and I would actually love it if she did, because then we practice what we're talking about. But this is something I've just been playing around with of, how is it that we help students engage in public life? And we do have activism, and again, you could even argue about what's individual versus collective, because voting is both individual and collective, but I'm not a protester. I don't like crowds and lines and schlepping with the masses, and it makes me really, really uncomfortable. And because I don't know what's going to happen, I don't know if I'm not a protester, right? That's my choice. But there are other ways that I can engage in public life, and I like to talk to students about this, so it's kind of geared more toward college students, but even things like service learning, engaging in outreach, helping people understand your discipline better, to go teach something to the Boys and Girls Club, and help, do something with the Girl Scouts and help them earn a badge. I mean, that's engaging in public life. So there's so many different ways of doing this. So just as Gabriella was talking, I was just like, oh, I got an infographic for that. This is great.
So I have if your students are interested, I don't have flyers yet ready to send out to people, but I will. My little project is we're calling it Choose Your Own Adventure. We're doing a little co-curricular thing starting this fall that we're piloting, that you basically sign up, and there are a bunch of pathways to like how to earn a LinkedIn badge and some cool PCD swag by doing a few community engagement things. And they can be like a mix and match of like, go to an on-campus event, do campus beautification day, do a service hour, go to an arts event. We're gonna do one that's do something in each of the 8 wards of DC.
It's like a piece of trash.
And well, this doesn't exist yet, but I told Vicky about it. We want to create actually something we want to call a helping hub, where there's basically like TaskRabbit for being nice to each other at AU, where we have like a way of giving and taking help like at AU. So like I can practice French with you, I can't, but things like that. But
we could probably use Give Pulse for that. Let's talk
we
about
started
it.
talking about doing it with
Right.
Give Pulse, and we might this meeting with anyway. It's in. But if you want your students to have maybe an option for some of these things, I will send you the PCD things that we have, both the Choose Your Own Adventure thing, that says like mix and match a bunch of civic engagement things written very broadly, although we also include like engagement with arts and culture. But I mean, it's all of a piece, and as well, you know, I think that, probably not this semester, but subsequent semesters, there might be, hopefully, maybe through gift policy, maybe not, a way for people to sort of micro volunteer in the community as like a stepping stone to some of this other engagement.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, so we've got 5-ish minutes before lunchtime, which looks delicious. Well, things you wanna talk about, things that are just quiet in your mind, things we didn't cover or did wrongly that we should do better at. What do you think about?
I think about how to like introduce it. I really liked that slide at the end of like tangible ways you can integrate these ideas, like abstract ideas. And, that one was great, but the one
Yeah, go back to that, yeah, I think it was your,
that one,
right
yeah,
there,
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
I really like this idea because it's like tangible ways that we can actually integrate this into our syllabi and our planning. I like the idea of like a paper debunking a piece of popular disinformation, and like how do you treat your students, like, you know, you talk about like the stereotypical Thanksgiving dinner where you have that, you know, family member who is misinformed about a topic, and like how do you like prepare your student to go to Thanksgiving dinner and defend their ideas and their learning. I like the idea of engaging with the other side of the topic that you feel strongly about and trying to see the other perspective, and kind of getting out of your own echo chamber.
I love the short paper, and that could even be something, you know, have students send it to the Eagle. The Eagle gets very well read.
Oh, that's an interesting
students send
idea,
things
like an
all the time.
op-ed.
I'm gonna work on something, I saw this idea somewhere this summer, and we have I promise I'm not STEM centric, it was in my head, but you know, we have a lot of students who did undergrad research over the summer. And I would love to do a workshop with them on write an op-ed for your hometown newspaper of what you did in science, why it matters, and how cuts to education, science, whatever hurt you and the things you care about. You know, send it, you know, because who reads hometown newspapers are like, you go back to the Thanksgiving thing, your drunk racist uncle, you know, and so help them broaden those perspectives, because you know, that can be a way of getting your thoughts and your experiences in front of other people, you know.
I think that's a great one that I also do, and it requires a little doing, you know, in terms of for each of your disciplines, seeing what's out there. But I've had students write regulatory comments and actually submit them.
Oh, wow.
And they can either be to DC or to some federal thing, so it's like, you know, I mean, right now it feels federally like, oh, they care about public comment, but you know, the administration is asking, like, should we have net neutrality? And it's like, write a comment. And even just the practice, which gets to that understand how to be heard, even just the practice of saying, student, select your hometown and find out, like, is the city council currently considering whether to do a bond issue for school? You know, what are they considering? Or like, back to science, like, are they considering, you know, protecting or not protecting some body of water? Like,
removing books from school.
yeah.
I had another thought.
Just
So many.
On the short reflection, I have a few different ones, but toward the end of the semester, sometimes I like to do a bookend. So at the beginning of the semester, I have a Canvas quiz and I say, like, describe a kind of civic-ish goal that you might want to be working on this year. And I give some examples, like listening, speaking up more, exploring kinds of readings you never have, getting outside of your comfort zone, you know, improving your communication, whatever. And I define them and I say it could be something else. And just let me know about it. And I read all these, and it's sort of part of how I get to know my students at the beginning. And then at the end, they do this dialogue reflection. And I ask them, like, they can do it on how did they do on the thing. So like, what did it look like? Like, what really worked for you in terms of like understanding opposing views or speaking up more or listening better? Like, what was the process? This can be really helpful to me as a teacher because I find out the things that really worked in terms of what I was doing in class. But the others that I do is describe how a position changed, or describe like your engagement across difference. So like if you had at least 2 conversations about a topic, like how did you engage across difference? And I let them know right at the beginning of the semester that these are the types of things they can work on so that they're having an ear to like, I really should be in at least a couple of conversations about a topic, and I make opportunities for this. But you can do this, I think, with your democracy skills as well. Just say like, hey, one of the things that's gonna happen. For me, for what it's worth, these things to me usually go into my course engagement grade, which some people call class participation. So if you're trying to figure out like, for example, how would you ever grade a dialogue across difference reflection? You just can't. So what I do is like the bundle of stuff that's not like a midterm, a final, whatever, the bundle of stuff that's not the big assessments, that I can do very yes, no, like did you do it, didn't you, and it includes attendance, includes that, and it's like 15% of my, there's sort of a rubric for it, but it means that this reflection is like sort of a yes, no thing that I'm not grading them because I think these are sort of, that, also that would be an enormous amount of work. It's just a thing to think about. Or but even just giving feedback on 30 of those when you're about to also give feedback on a final, so it's more just like, I learned from these, I think the act of doing them, does something for the students, but
And I think
that's
also,
where it can fit.
you know, where you're talking about like, you know, if they don't wanna be cold called that day, right, which I really appreciate. I also think it's important for them to then generalize that to going home and maybe not having that conversation if they're not up to it. Like, they don't always need to argue their point if they're not in that, you know what I mean? Cause sometimes it's for their own health and well-being too. So I always, because AU students are so politically like minded and they're activist minded, and I love that about them, but sometimes it's at the cost of their own. So I like,
And at the cost of their relationships.
that's
Every
as a family
year,
scientist, yes.
every year, the week before Thanksgiving, we do a disagree with your family event for PCD, and this year we're moving it up and having it on family weekends so that they can do disagree with their family, like with the parents. But that's one of the questions, it's like, do I want to have this conversation?
If we don't both have the same idea of what truth is, are we gonna actually get somewhere in that moment in time?
And who thinks the Thanksgiving table is the best place to do this?
Exactly.
We have to respect your time and we have to also follow honest directions, so thank you all.
Thanks,
There
everyone.
are surveys they want people to fill in, so let's keep talking about this.